I know that Pastor Shine and I also have kind of a reputation at this church. Yeah, and some of it is maybe a little bit like that kind of robotic, like, just like gung ho, all in, all that stuff. And I will say this about Pastor Shine, though. I mean, I've known him well enough where he has humanity. He's actually pretty nice for the most part. Although, if you're in a relationship with a girl, like, don't go to him because he'll just rebuke you, the guy. Though, I mean, yeah, he won't say anything to the girl, but he'll just, I mean, if you're ready for that, go to him. But in general, he's very, I mean, I see it. The reason why I shared this is I just kind of wanted to open a window to my soul a little bit, and because I feel like it's not just about me, but I really felt like the Lord was pressing this upon me to share not only tonight, but also on Sunday a similar message along those lines, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just as excited and gung-ho about EE as anybody else. I'm really thrilled. Like, I just so want to see some of us, like, reorient our lives, right? The way we do church instead of focusing on this, that ministry. But get back to the basics of what we are called to be as a church and really be a light and to make sure that people come into the kingdom. But having said that, I think sometimes when we get outward focused and oriented and so forth, there are times in our lives when we neglect our own souls. And it's not even that we're neglecting it, but sometimes we get so wrapped up in something that maybe it's time for us to also take a step back and allow ourselves to really allow the Lord to really examine our hearts and to dig deep into our souls. And so, I don't know, one of my favorite authors is Henry Nouwen. I don't know if you guys know him. He actually was a homosexual. He did not engage in that behavior. Unlike what's going on in today's society, but it was a real struggle for him, and he wrote so many good books, but there's a particular book called The Wounded Healer that he wrote that I would absolutely recommend. And basically what he's talking about, and the reason why I really love him, is that he's so open and honest about his brokenness, but there's such a depth in his walk with Jesus that just oozes out of every word that really he writes. And basically this idea of a wounded healer is that while we are on this side of eternity, that we have wounds, that we have brokenness and so forth, but in the midst of that, how God can use us, and that in the midst of that, how we actually learn how to function depending on God, basically. That's a premise. And so I share this because this past Sunday was like a really discouraging, like a really disheartening Sunday for me. And so one of our brothers came up to me and told me that he was going to leave our church and our ministry, and who's very near and dear to my heart. And there were a number of students that I know in our college ministry who are struggling and who kind of like shut things down, and they're not responding to my texts or messages or any of those things, and I don't know. So up until like EE was done, I mean, I was busy and occupied on Sunday, but when I came home, and usually on Sunday nights, I don't know, I mean, Pastor Shine says he's not hungry or he's this and that, but like, I'm like so tired. Like it doesn't matter what time of the day it is, when I come back home from Sunday, if I lie down, I fall asleep, I'm so like hungry after Sunday and all of these things, and I came back home, and because I'm not so busy anymore, now I get to dwell on this, right? And I'm thinking about this brother who's going to leave. I'm thinking about some of these students who are unresponsive, or some of them who are so like walking in a way that's not pleasing to the Lord, and so forth. And so I went to bed that night. And then I woke up really early in the morning. I don't know, maybe it was like 4:30 or something like that. And I know by experience by now that, I try to go back to sleep, and when I can't go back to sleep, I know it's really from the Lord. Because I'm like a guy, if I go to sleep, it's almost like I'm dead. Like, you can't wake me up. I'm a really deep sleeper. And so I knew it was the Lord, so I walked out of the room, I went to my couch, and I just started to pray. And so I started to pray to the Lord, right? I'm kind of like, God, like some of these kids I've had since junior high, and I don't know, like, God, like, did I not raise them right? Because for me, I mean, what makes sense is like, I mean, if you're going through that much struggles and difficulty, like, who do you turn to? Like, I would think that that would actually drive you more, like, you need God. Like, where are you going to find the answer? But a lot of them, I guess, I don't know, the way I see it, maybe it's just an immature way to react. They just tank and they just don't come to church, and I'm just kind of like, well, how does that help? You know, in any sense? I don't know. And just over the years, there have been times. It's kind of crazy because I'm in my 10th year here, and where the Lord would remind me that He needs to come before ministry. And I know that sounds so obvious, but there have been times when the Lord has like put a break in me and said, you know, remember that I need to be your first love, and that ministry could become your idol. And I remember a message I heard like about 9 years ago, and there was this reminder of that, you know, we don't want to ride on the world's definition of what a success is. Like, I'm not a success because my ministry is flourishing. I mean, not that obviously it's great if your ministry is fruitful. I'm not a success because this or that, but I'm a success simply because God has loved me and redeemed me, and I know who He is. And I started to ask of the Lord, and as I was praying early that Monday morning, I was like, God, like, oh, am I doing this for you? Like, do I really even love you? Like, am I doing ministry really for you? Or is there like a lot of these selfish things that are embedded into my motivations? And I had to catch myself and stop myself. And it's like, yeah, it's like, you do love the Lord. I think, you know, and but at the same time, just kind of, you know, putting a break and just wondering, like, God, am I doing this right? And you know, God was showing me like basically this vision of a boat that's kind of, you know, it goes off the dock and into the waters, and you know, and He was basically calling upon me to come back to the dock. And you know, when you're in the waters, naturally like gunk forms, and you know, different things happen, and sometimes it just naturally builds upon as we do certain tasks or whatnot, and to really just come back to the dock so that things could get cleansed all over again. But what He was really calling upon me to do was to just find rest in Him, and how we all need to remember that our rest, we don't find that with extra time, you know, extra leisure. And I'm not saying like, I mean, maybe if we're just way too busy for our good, maybe we do need extra time. But I'm saying, like, we got to remember the word of Jesus in Matthew 11:28, right? Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And for my yoke is easy, my burden is light, He said, right? And so, I mean, it just, you know, and He said that you will find rest for your souls. And to me, that's a messianic statement in a sense. Like, no one claims that, right? No man claims that. Like, come to me and you will find rest. I mean, that is God's declaration. And, you know, over the years, the Lord has spoken to me multiple times, and some of those times have been through different people. I kid you not, I remember this one time here at this church, I don't know, it was probably within my first year in the ministry, and I was so discouraged. And I was thinking, okay, you know, like, I got to quit. And I said, God, I'm so sorry. I feel like a failure because I know you called me. Like, I mean, I have a pretty crazy testimony of how you called me, God. So I know without a shadow of a doubt you called me, and you would think that that is enough for me. And I said, God, I think that should be enough for me, but I don't know. I'm just finding that it's not. I don't know, but I just want to quit. And so I remember rehearsing in my mind, like, God, how do I go up next Sunday and tell the kids that I'm gonna leave them? I was like, I can't, and I'm just kind of like in this state of, struggle. And I just happened to be in the gym, It was after a Friday night, and just this grandma I never met comes to me, and she's like, oh my gosh, I saw your face. You exist, And basically what she was saying was the Lord was telling me to pray for you. And I was like, okay, that's good. I could use some prayer. And then she was just telling me, the Lord just really wanted to tell you how much He loves you. And I'm just kind of like, oh gosh, I'm like tearing up. But I received a lot of words from the Lord, different words of prophecy, words of knowledge, and so forth through different channels. And I tell you, the Lord telling me that He loves me has occurred more frequently than all the other words combined. And I think it's really important, right? And so, you know how like your wife always wants to hear like, I love you, right? And you're like, okay, right? And it's like insatiable, But that is true in a love relationship, where it's not like enough just to hear it one time, but it's important for us to always be reminded of that. And so, funny thing, of course, I could just see God's fingerprints all over my life, and I normally don't meet people in the mornings because I try to spend my time with the Lord in the mornings after I send my kids off to school and the craziness subsides. But there was a friend of mine in particular who was just in town for the weekend, and he was leaving on Monday afternoon, and so my only time to meet with him was Monday morning, and so I met with him, and I was just kind of sharing with him how I had a really discouraging day the day before, and I was, I didn't really share a lot of details, but I remember, like I shared with you, like in the morning, I was like, God, like, do I even love you? Like, am I doing this out of my love for you? And the first thing he says, well, God's giving me a few words over you right now, and he said, hey, you do love me. That was the first words that came out of his mouth. And again, I didn't share that kind of content with him, but I know he hears from the Lord and has a deep prayer life and so forth. And he was giving me just a bunch of words that was just like, just water to a parched land. You know what I mean? And the following day, on Tuesday, actually, while I was in meeting, staff church meeting, I find out that my mother-in-law was driving with my wife and with our youngest, the baby, and they got into a car accident. And thank God the baby's totally fine. Mother-in-law and wife are kind of they're okay for the most part. It's not too bad, but they, I guess their back's hurting a little bit and things of that nature. But even in that, not that I'm a guy who gets flustered all that easily, but I just found so much peace, just a sense of shalom. That word peace, the world defines it a lot of times as like lack of turbulence, right? Lack of the storms and the waves of our lives. But the Hebrew word shalom actually means that we lack nothing, that we are complete. So then Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want, I shall not need anything because He is my shepherd, is an indication of that we have everything in Him and that we are not in want of other things. And I really sense that, right, in my heart and in my life. And so, as I've shared before with some of you college students, and how Jesus restores Peter in John chapter 21 when Peter is at his absolute lowest state after denying Jesus 3 times. When Jesus told him he's going to do that, right? He's like, no, all these guys can leave you, but me, I'm going to stick by you. And then that same day he denies him. And of course, in one of the gospel accounts, it talks about how when the rooster crowed, his eyes met with Jesus's eyes. And like, even reading that, I shudder, like, oh my gosh, sorry, like, like it's too scary for me. But when Jesus restores him, and a lot of people read that verse, not correctly. Remember, Jesus, he doesn't ask questions because he doesn't know and he needs to find some information from you, right? He knows all things. And that was actually Peter's declaration the third time he confessed. It's like, Peter, do you love me? It's like, yes, Lord, I love you. Then feed my sheep. But Peter, do you love me? And again, it wasn't Jesus saying, hey, I know you deserted me, and so like, I really got to know. I mean, if you're up to the task, if you're going to be the leader, like, do you love me? But it was his way of reminding Peter, Peter, you do love me. Peter, you do love me. Because out of that place, Peter was going to do his ministry. And and the Lord reminded me actually something that I had forgotten for a little while, but I remember him telling me years back, and he said, I'm going to teach you I'm going to take you to that place where you're going to learn that you can only depend on me and absolutely nothing else in your life. And I remember when he spoke that over me, I was like, wow, God, that sounds kind of hard. But I said, if that's what I need, God. I mean, I guess that's what I need. Let it come. But I'm also discovering that I'm kind of a slow learner. There are certain things that I used to think I was a quick learner in, but there are certain things, particularly about dying to myself, that I'm actually a very slow learner in. And I guess, with the calling that God has placed in my life, what God's continuing to teach me is like, you need to die to yourself, before you embark on your calling. And so the reason why, and the Lord spoke this to me clearly over the years, the reason why I'm not in the mission field right now is not because of my unwillingness. It's not because my kids are young. It's none of those things, but the Lord is telling me that I'm not ready. I'm not ready in my character. I'm not ready in my own growth. I'm not ready, because the calling that He has given me is such a particular and a difficult calling, like someone says spread false rumors about me, and I get like all worked up, and then I read the Bible, and like Stephen, he's getting stoned and he's blessing those people. I'm like, all right, God, I'm not ready. It's like, while these people are killing you, you're doing the exact same thing what Jesus did on the cross. Like, Father, forgive them, for they not know what they're doing. And I think to myself too, like, I mean, can I really do that? Am I in a place in my life and in my heart? And ultimately, we have to remember that Jesus, He was broken for us, right? His body was broken for us. He was a broken man in Gethsemane, and He was broken on the cross to the point where He's like, my Father, like, lama, right? I mean, why have you forsaken me? He said. And I think it's very important for us to understand, like, we know the story of Jacob and how, his life story is actually very sordid, but I think there's something that we can learn from that. Sometimes we feel like we need to help God out, right? God made it very clear from their birth, before their birth, Jacob, you're going to be the one through whose line he's going to be Israel. But he still felt the need to deceive his own father and to put on those garments and smell a certain way so that he would receive the father's blessing. And we got to remember that God would have figured out a way to do it on His own. So he lived out his life and deceiving his uncle Laban and all of these things. And he finally comes to the end of himself. His brother Esau's coming after him. He's really just not sure what's going to happen. And he's in the river Jabbok, right? And then the angel of the Lord, or God, comes and wrestles him. And that word wrestle is often used coupled with the word prayer throughout the scriptures. that sometimes we do need to wrestle with God, and maybe we won't literally wrestle with him and he won't take out part of our leg, but we do need to learn to wrestle with him in that sense. When we look at King David's life, here was a guy who was absolutely broken. I can't think of anything worse. I can't think of going any lower in life than doing what he did with Bathsheba and Uriah, and your son dies because of your sin. I don't know how I could live with myself if I knew that because of my sin, my child died. I don't know. And in that midst, but we see. And for us, when we think of David, who was such a worshiper of God, we think of him just dancing, in a linen ephod. He wasn't naked, actually, but it was still a very crass thing for a king to do in front of a whole nation, and he didn't care. And I think that's so awesome. But to me, I see a greater heart of worship in his life when he was at his absolute lowest moment. He found that the Lord had taken his son away. He goes and washes himself, and he goes into the temple and he worships God. And if I could be a fly in the wall over any occasion in the scriptures, I wish I was a fly in the wall to see what David's worship looked like after all of this had happened. But he was broken, of course, and Psalm 51, of course, comes out of that time with this. But, I look at him and I read some of his Psalms, and some of you guys know I've shared this before, but I sometimes question what lives inside of a man that he could pray the things that he prayed. Where he would come before God and he would be like, God, search me and know me. That see if there be any wicked way in me, God, right? So that I may have the fear of the Lord. But I would read that and it would strike me wow, would I ever have come to a place out of my own where I would actually lift that same prayer? Who prays like that is something that grabs my heart. And so he praised some of the most beautiful things out of that place of brokenness. Before he became a king, he was in the deserts of En-Gedi with his life being chased around by Saul and his troops. And he knew much sorrow and tragedy, but I do think that part of the reason why he was a man after God's own heart was because he was someone who was so thoroughly broken before the Lord. So humble. He's a king of a nation, but so humble before God. And it's something that we need to remember, that God can only remake what is already broken, right? It's not about us, we're here and we just need a little finishing touch by God. But if something isn't completely broken, God can mold it and make it into whatever shape that he desires to use us for. And I've seen this in my own life. I certainly heard testimonies in other people's lives. I was reading something that Charles Spurgeon, the great 19th century British preacher, wrote, and he was talking about this point in his ministry where he was so depressed, and he was like, I don't know what to do. And he shared that with his congregation and took a 3-month break, but there was a man who heard that message who was so depressed himself. And 3 months later, when Charles Spurgeon returned back to his ministry, that man came and he could tell something in his countenance was different, and how he said that out of that message that he came to know the Lord. And what we have to remember is brokenness requires surrender on our part. And I was talking with one of our sisters earlier this week as well, and I feel her pain to a degree because there's just so much brokenness in her home, and I've prayed with her and for that family over the years, and I sometimes see her and I kind of marvel at her strength. If I was her age, I don't think I could handle it like she does. But I was reminding her that the Lord, He really does work all things for good of those who love Him, and that He is able to redeem all things, because His desire is not that we would simply be broken and broken only, but He's the one who heals the brokenhearted and binds up and mends these things, right? But what is important for us is always to have a heart of humility. a heart of brokenness before the Lord. And I was reminding her that, I know it's difficult, but let's trust and hope in the Lord, because again, kind of like what Peter confessed, who can we turn to but the Lord? But trusting that this will bear a better fruit in your life as well. As you have heart and passion for young people, that you may be able to speak into their lives that many of us are not able to because of your situation and so forth. And I know that for us as well, that God sometimes needs to break us and reshape us again. And we got to be ready and willing for Him to mold us to however degree He would like, so that in this particular season or chapter, maybe Charles Spurgeon, the foremost preacher, the prince of preachers of the world at the time, for him to be depressed and to lead one soul, right? And so for us to be willing to be like, Lord, really have your way and mold me. And to really pray what David prayed, like, break me. It's such a Christianese language, but if you really think about it, it's just such a crazy prayer. Like, God, break me. It's like, who prays that? Like, who wants that? But he did. I don't think he did that out of compulsion. I think he really wanted that for himself, so that maybe this next season of your life, God wants to mold you in a certain way so that you could reach a certain people that maybe you haven't been able to, because now your life actually speaks that. And so even as we give ourselves to EE, which I absolutely am thrilled about, but in another sense, sometimes our best testimony is I remember this one particular friend of mine who, it was just a debater, and he thinks, he's like the smartest guy on the face of the planet. And I got really sick and tired of him mocking God. And so we debated, and I kind of crushed him. I mean, it's not just like me saying it, but people around, they would all agree. But of course, that didn't bring him to the Lord whatsoever, right? Nor did anyone who watched our debate. But later I apologized to him. And that opened his heart more than anything ever in his life. And sometimes we have to remember, it's a verse I'm all too familiar with, but I don't know too well in my life or my heart. But when Apostle Paul talks about how God's strength is made perfect in weakness, and I've had those moments in my life, but when he says that he will boast about his weakness, I'm like, whoa, okay, don't go there. Whoa, you mean it's not courageous enough for me to actually share about my weakness? It's like he's saying he's gonna brag about it. It's like, you crazy. Who does that? But he was just so assured of the glory and greatness of God, that if through his weakness that God's strength would be revealed and God will be glorified, he was willing to die to his own reputation, die to himself, to really see God move in such a manner. And I don't know, that is my prayer too. I remember years ago, I was praying to God, and I was so at the end of myself, kind of like Jacob, and I was so frustrated. I was like, God, I'm a pastor, but God, when am I ever going to overcome my impurity? When am I going to ever overcome my dishonesty? When am I ever going to overcome, God, how much longer do I need to pray about this? It's like, God, I'm sick of this. Honestly, I'm pretty, I just kind of pray, he knows my thoughts before, so I'm just, right? So, not being disrespectful, I'm just I'm tired of praying over the same thing year after year after year. And I was just like, God, tell me that there is something's going to change at some point in my life, God, because I can't live like this. And the Lord started to speak to me. And it was, he was telling me, look to me. Seek me. And behind that, what he was saying was, you think the light at the end of the tunnel is you overcoming these areas in your life. And the Lord saying, no, I want you to pursue me. Because if you overcome those things, you might forget how weak you are. You might forget that your greatest good is to pursue my face, not about self-help and getting rid of all your weaknesses. And so we know there's power in transparency. I believe that is part of the principle of God's strength made perfect in weakness. We look at the woman with the alabaster jar and how she broke it before Jesus' feet. But I believe it's more than that costly perfume, but I believe we offer our lives to Him, and our lives need to come before Him in a broken state. Jesus allowing the woman bleeding to touch Him was a revolutionary thing, but that it was a heart of Jesus. Jesus touching the leper was a revolutionary thing, again, because these people were unclean by the standards of Israel. Jesus didn't have to touch the leper. He could have just spoken and then he would have been healed, but He made a point to touch him and heal him. And so all this I say, let's actually look at Isaiah 57:15. We should put some scripture up there too, right? The Lord says this, for thus says a high and exalted one who lives forever, whose name is holy. I dwell on a high and holy place, and also with the contrite and lowly of spirit, in order to revive the spirit of the lonely and to revive the heart of the contrite. It's crazy how He says that He dwells in this most high and holy place, but there's another place that He dwells in, and He dwells with the contrite and lowly of spirit. Apostle Paul, the super Christian, the go-getter, he says in 2 Corinthians 1, for we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble, which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of our life. But he says, but we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver, and in whom we trust that He will yet deliver us again. And just to close, I really hope that we are praying, especially those of us involved with EE, as Pastor Shine has been reminding us that the spiritual warfare is coming, and it's really important for us to equip ourselves in prayer. But also, not only for the spiritual battle that is to come, that we know that the Lord Jesus has already won for us, but let us pray because we want to share the gospel of Christ, as Apostle Paul declared in 2 Corinthians 5, because His love compels us. That when we're focused on these tasks, and they're great because these are the things that please the heart of God, but let us also learn to slow down and reflect and look into our hearts and to really make sure that we are in a place where we're deeply in love with the Lord. And that we don't allow how many people we save to become the barometer of our spirituality. That we don't allow the external things to define who we are and how God is using us, which is great. Of course, we all want to be used by God. But having said that, though, understanding really that we are nothing without Him. That there is not another notch on our belt. It's not like we advance in spiritual levels, but we never outgrow humility. We never outgrow the brokenness and contrite of spirit, and we certainly don't outgrow our intimacy with the Lord. And so as we really gear ourselves to seek His face and do His kingdom work and to save lost souls and develop a passion for the lost like never before, let us also be people who are strong in our interior life, and that we are in love with the Lord and not putting ministry above Him, and that we are allowing Him to define what success is in our lives over the things that become almost like a resume in the Christian sense. So I don't know, we don't have a lot of time, so let's spend the next 5-6 minutes in prayer. Let's make it, we got to make it short, but let's make it sweet and deep before the Lord. And I don't know. I don't even know how to lead this prayer, but okay, God, do your thing. Let's just take this time to just pray. If there are areas of brokenness in your lives, let's just come honestly before the Lord and lay it before Him. And more than the brokenness and how you fail or how you don't measure up and getting into that mode, let's trust the Lord will redeem it. If you have brokenness in your family relationship, let's lay it before the altar of our God, the only one who can do something about it, right? If we have brokenness in our own character and lives, maybe you have habitual sins or the character flaws like I did, where I was just so beyond myself and so frustrated. But I bring it before the Lord still and I say, God, I know you're going to redeem me. I can only trust you, God. Certainly don't trust in my power. And so whatever it is that we have, let us just lay that down before Him and trust in His redemption power and trust that He is faithful to work all things for good of those who love Him, and that even that brokenness God is going to redeem, and that there may be a greater purpose in God using those areas of our lives. So can we just take this time to just lay that down before the Lord? Let's pray together. Lord Jesus. Take this time to just pray that we would never outgrow dependence upon the Lord, kind of like our brother Alex's testimony, and just doing all things in prayer, that no matter how God uses us, that we would never lose that humility of heart. For some of us, maybe we will never lose that purity of heart when we first served the Lord. When we first came and we were so privileged, we were so honored, but so trembling and scared, like, God, I don't know, you can use me. Whatever that's, that God would take us back to being a beginner all over again, and we would never outgrow humility in our hearts, that we would always find ourselves in that place of humility where God will dwell and honor us in that place. So let's just lift that up, shall we? Let's cry out to the Lord together. 1, 2, 3. Jesus! 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 Father, we just take this time that you will humble us corporately, that you will humble us individually, oh God.